Greetings. I've been making publicly available the board packets that it creates for many months now. And I know that some people look at them, but probably not a ton of people because who wants to look through a huge political packet? And yet people want to know what's happening. So I thought maybe doing video briefs before the meetings would be a good idea. People could check it out over the weekend while the packets are still publicly available. I've also gotten a bunch of feedback, mostly from the board, about having huge packets. And so I decided, and we have had huge packets, approaching 300 pages, because I like to have a lot of reference material. If we're doing something like voting on a contract, I'd like to include the previous contracts that would be relevant so they'd be compared and contrasted, that type of thing. And so what I'm doing in this meeting is separating out the board packet, and this is still relatively large, 79 pages, smaller than some we've had, but bigger than probably what will be normal going forward. But we also have 8 resolutions in here. We have a memorandum. We have 4 land sales, which I'll briefly go over. And then I separated out a reference packet, which is not part of the board packet, that just includes things that I think are relevant for people to know and to look at. So this is board meeting agenda with my own notes on it. And there are a few changes in here. In the last board meeting, we had a talk about having an invocation, and there were a few different views on that. What I have attempted to do in coming up with one is combining some of the wording from the state constitution as well as the Declaration of Independence. So we'll see how people like that, but this is what I have. We are gathered here under the laws of nature and nature's God, earnestly desiring to secure the blessings of freedom undiminished to ourselves and our posterity with the guidance of providence and the supreme judge of the world. So I think it's pretty good. Otherwise, we have all of our business stuff at the top here, approval of the meeting minutes, previous meeting minutes, and paying the bills, and that type of stuff, a fire department report, planning commission report. Next, we get into after public comment, we get into our actual agenda items, the things the board is going to be voting on. And in this case, it starts off with the salary resolution for the supervisor, the clerk, the treasurer, and the trustees. These are something that you have to legally do every year. And we have an annual meeting of the electors. Now, last time, a few people showed up, and you can fill up the political room here and still not be very representative of the public, because we have about 9,400 people in the township in total, probably 1,300 in the village. So you could technically exclude them because they have their own council and elected officials. So depending on how you want to figure it, but somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 people to represent. And I think the village should be included in that in a decent number of ways and go to some of their meetings, that type of thing. But the annual meeting of the electors, you can get people to push spending more money, which is what happened last year. And I was advocating for keeping the salaries the same for the elected officials, and it was pressed pretty heavily at the meeting, and I didn't expect that. I expected people to say, hey, don't give yourself raises. That seems like the reasonable way to go. And it went the other way. I wasn't prepared for it. And so now I've inquired in with the lawyer on exactly how the annual meeting works, because some people said that, well, we should cancel it because the township could go broke in that single meeting if a few people show up, basically, and vote to spend all the money on something. And what it is I like the annual meeting of the electors. I like people being able to come in and vote. It very much reminds me of part of the Viking and Old English, like medieval English political systems. And so it's this interesting throwback to history. Most townships don't do it anymore. But there's limitations, and I checked with the lawyer on this, on what can be voted on. And basically what the electors, the people, any citizens in the township that show up to vote in that, what they can do is stop the elected officials from giving themselves a raise. So it's exactly what I thought would be proper. It's not the approval of the entire budget. So when Lori was drafting up these resolutions, she inquired into, should we do some sort of raise, something like that? And I said, no, let's just keep the salaries the same, and we'll try that again for the second year and see if it goes through. And next, we have our Michelin road special assessments. Now, a special assessment is a rough process. I do not like them. They're clunky, as most government infrastructure things are. In this case, we have to go through 4 resolutions. And so it can be a 3-step process is normal to have resolution 2 and 3 together. I've been separating them into 4 to give people adequate time for the word to get out, for people to discuss it, for people to see things, come to the meeting, say what they think, that type of thing. We had number 2 at the previous meeting. We had the hearing on it, so we don't need to have the hearing again, but the board postponed making the decision. And so we'll end up having resolution 2 and 3 in the same meeting again. And if resolution 2 passes, then I sign it, I'll file it with the clerk right there, it's reported to the board, then we'll move on to resolution number 3. There were a few concerns there and a few pieces of misinformation. Came up at the previous meeting that the horse trail wasn't included, which is township-owned property. And the case here, so the township could be exempt, right? I can just say, the township's exempt, it's not going to pay on this. The other side of the argument is because then you have all the taxpayers in the township paying for part of the paving of Michelin in a limited way, but also the township has decided since the 1990s to have a park there, which does cause some traffic. So in this case, especially because everyone's splitting it evenly on the road, I said the township could be included on this list. And then we checked in with the state for the bike trail, and they are exempt, so they can't be included. Their parcel number is technically included, but they're just exempt, so they don't have money to pay for that. And so we'll see if those go through. Next, we have the expenditure policy. So in this came up with the treasurer for signing checks, because there's a certain process all of that has to go through. And what municipalities have run into is that you have certain bills, certain regular bills and this type of thing, and then other things that come up that maybe aren't so regular. But if you're waiting every 30 days to take everything to the board to be approved before you pay anything, you end up being late on stuff, and it's hard to gauge when you're buying things, and repairs could be delayed, replacements that need to be necessary, or you're calling special assessments or special meetings when those things need to occur. So to avoid those, most municipalities move towards having certain things that can just go through and be done. And we adjusted the purchasing policy to move more in that direction, to smooth some things out. I did not realize that the township had been operating a certain way on signing checks for I'm not sure how long, but it appears to be a long time. And to actually legally do that process, there should be an expenditure policy, which apparently has never been passed in the township. So at some point in the past, the township made an adjustment in that process without having the proper paperwork in place. So this expenditure policy is supposed to exist, and now it's going to exist as long as the board passes it. Predicting which way boards are going to vote is always difficult, always a guessing game, so we'll see. But assuming that it goes through, this brings what should be happening in the paperwork together properly, and it brings our process in alignment with the purchasing policy as well. Next is the enforcement process. And what we ended up with here is, I think due process is very important. I've made the case for it quite a bit at the township and in meetings and in writing and in my newspaper articles in the White Lake Beacon. And so we have worked on that. We've put it into resolution format because I knew some things would need to be worked out. So it would not be good to go through the whole ordinance process and then need to be changing a bunch of things, and that can be relatively time delayed. And so until we get it working well, I wanted it to be in resolution format. We did that. Part of what we did is a process that's in all the paperwork. I'm in a zoning course, just completed it actually, so I have to take the exam. It's my third zoning course since being in, because you might as well front load all of the learning in a position like this. And this is the binder for this one. And it even states in there that it's possible for the township to do an administrative appeal to the Zoning Board of Appeals in enforcement cases. It's not usually done, but it would definitely lead to better due process. The issue is that a lot of people don't come to the hearings, and then because the Zoning Board of Appeals hasn't been involved in the process for the couple of months that it's taken to make it to them, when they see it for the first time, they're hesitant about it, and then they feel like they're rubber stamping it, and it's not working out ideal. But people do have the possibility of appealing to them, and so as we're working out how our enforcement letters go and this type of stuff, getting a good process in place, this makes adjustments to that, so the automatic appeal is not there, but people are informed of their rights, basically, so which is good. Next, we have the Diversion Council Memorandum of Understanding, which is for our fire department to go through certain types of training to lead certain people in certain incidents into different parts of the legal system. The issue with this, and we postponed it from the last meeting, because I included a bunch of information and the board wanted to have time to look it over. But most of the information I included were from higher levels of the organization stepping up and that type of thing, and how the process is supposed to work. But it's difficult to actually find that information for the county. Now, both the sheriff and the prosecutor said it's a good idea, but I'm having a difficulty coming up with especially any recent information on how the process is actually working. And it seems like it might have ended up being one of those government issues where a commission created a committee that created a council that created a board. There was a lot of talking, and I'm not sure exactly what has happened, what is happening, and so it's difficult for me personally to approve something in that type of situation. But the board has had the chance to look over the information that I was able to find, at least. Next, we have 2 land bid openings. These are the sale requests that we put up last month, and then after that we have 2 more sale requests on property. And so, and if people want details on those, that detailed information they're in the packets, which are publicly posted on the website in the agenda area. So resident packets is what I've started calling them. Next, we have a few discussion items. One, I have a budget discussion, which is just budget in general. And we have to discuss the ARPA money because the township is getting a little over $800,000. We have to have projects planned by the end of 2024 and completed by the end of 2026. And so I think there can be a lot of debate on what should happen there. Obviously, our parks, and Kelly, the treasurer, has been looking at this and getting quotes and things. The parks have been allowed to kind of fall into this dilapidated state over a number of years, and so something should go there. A bunch of stuff in these buildings doesn't work, some of the plugs and things, so these buildings have been allowed to fall apart to a decent extent. And there's not exactly enough room here. We have a bunch of filing cabinets in the hallways and that type of stuff. Whether we should add on, I'm not certain on. And so, and now it's opened up enough. One of the reasons we moved on it slow, I directed people to move on it slow, is because the rules weren't finalized. This was pushed through at the federal level as a big political gambit, basically. And they didn't actually have rules to go with it when they approved it. And so the rules have been shifting and changing, but now we have the final rules in place, and it came pretty open. And so now the money can even be spent on roads. The issue with that type of thing is the allocation of where it goes, which we wouldn't be paving anyone's roads with it, that type of thing, because you would use all the money on a single small piece of road. But we could maybe use it for the normal amount of repairs that we do based on the recommendations from the road commission, something like that. We also need to schedule a work session, and so I'm bringing that to the board about the budget. And then we move on to PFAS. And so PFAS, and I believe we talked about this in a previous meeting, I presented to the Muskegon Lake Watershed Partnership on it. And we have 3 major contamination sites in the township. One is the Dual Gardner landfill, which we had a big thing with last year. One is the business park, which we have fixed some of the major barriers that were there for that land being sold, even though it's been available for 20 years. And then there is this one, which is newer. PFAS is a type of chemical, and I've been in a few seminars on it. And it's just in all sorts of things. when they list and show a picture of things that it could be in, they just show stuff. They show wrappers on food, and they show clothes, and they show furniture, and they show all sorts of stuff. And it's been in more things in the past. It was like in the foam they use for putting out certain types of fires and that type of thing. And so it was in Scotch Guard, all sorts of stuff. I don't believe they've shown that it really damages people yet, but it does intertwine or wrap itself around the DNA. So I think we can all assume that that's not going to come good be good thing when we eventually know what that means. And so we'll see how that comes out. But the stuff is very pervasive. So Michigan really started ramping up in 2018 for checking out and detecting PFAS. And then in 2020, they added a few chemicals under the PFAS designation and increased their sensitivity levels. At that point, they had detected at a child care facility, which is wild, on M120 that there was some contamination. And so first heard about that last winter, about a year ago, and Eagle was checking into it. So they located an old landfill that had shut down in the 1970s, a little north of there, called the Northside Landfill. And they drilled various holes and did testings, did mailings to the people around there to check their residential wells, and they found that there is definitely PFAS leaking out of the old Northside landfill site into Bear Creek there. And then it seems like at first they thought that was connected with the contamination along M120 in that one spot. But now based on their testing, they think there might be two separate issues actually. And now what's happening with it, and I talked to Eagle about this, and so over the last 4 years, they're averaging finding one PFAS contamination site every week. Right? So it's insane. It's just everywhere. And it obviously gets into the plants and animals. So it's apparently in all of our water and all of our plants and all of our animals. And so it's this hugely pervasive issue. And their idea of solving it is just going to be to put everyone in Michigan on municipal water, which I don't know how much that will cost, but that is a fortune. So governments get to make up money, so I guess that won't work. A Ponzi scheme eventually collapses upon itself. And so it's an interesting thing. Plus, municipal water doesn't fully get it out, so it really doesn't solve the problem. And then it certainly doesn't solve the problem of places where it's leaking into lakes and creeks and these types of things. So it's this hugely pervasive problem. And so Eagle wants the Water Policy Board for the county to run water up 120 in this case, which would obviously cost millions of dollars. Eagle would cover part of it. They would cover a grant, potentially for a few $1,000,000, but just to the one facility. And then you can't do that. You have to loop water around in some way, and Eagle can force you to do that. As far as I can tell, none of the boards and committees and groups and things in Eagle, which used to be DEQ, right now it's called Eagle, EGLE, none of them talk to each other, so none of them know what the other one is doing, which is classic, funny, and disturbing. And so eventually, if Muskegon ran that up there, then Eagle would force at some point, maybe a couple of years down the line, to loop this line if it wasn't looped initially. So you have to do that, otherwise you get stagnant water and this type of thing, and that might cost more millions that they wouldn't cover. So that has to come from various people connecting and this type of thing, and runs into a huge mess on finances. And we know what infrastructure mess can be. So we have the sewer thing up Whitehall Road in 2006 for $2.88 million, bankrupted a couple of businesses, disaster. We've talked about that in a few meetings. Anyway, that's the situation. And the next item is 2023. And I know it's the beginning of 2022, but I think it's important to be thinking about the big items coming up in 2023. And so one of the biggest things will be a fire millage. Technically, our operating fire millage comes up in 2024. But now that the fire department is setting records, had the first year over 1,000 calls, having only one full-time person in the chief and having everyone else paid on call is difficult to keep up with that capacity. And so it's reasonable, I think, to see an increase there to try to get more people into the fire department. Maybe the fire department would have to work this out, maybe add some more full-time people, whatever it may be, and maybe more paid on-call people, although we've been trying to recruit people there, and we've posted things on social media and Indeed, and haven't gotten very many applications from here. The applications we have had are from other places in the state, and that's because those people are looking for full-time firefighter jobs, but to be paid on call, you have to live here so that you can respond to things. And so it's one of those spots where Dalton is in this transition stage from kind of a small rural area into a not so small, not so rural area. And because we're in that transition stage, it creates a lot of these types of things, growing pains, essentially. And if I just brought up the fire operating millage in 2024 with an increase and it was voted down, then we could have the fire department go away, which is obviously a disaster, and that wouldn't go well. So to avoid that, what I'm doing is bringing in 2023, so 1 year before the operating millage would be it to a vote, because it's a general vote, right? The people should decide on something like this. And so that will include the increase, right? The renewal and the increase in 2023. Now, if people are like, no, we're good with the paid on-call fire department, we don't want more firefighters, then that will get voted down. And then we can bring up just the renewal in 2024. And that way we're not just voting once to see whether we completely have or lose the fire department. So I think that's a much better plan and strategy. Next, we also have the master plan coming up, the zoning master plan in 2023. Now, it was done in 2018, so it's supposed to be renewed, redone in some fashion every 5 years. In this case, I think we probably don't, and I talked over with Steve, our zoning administrator, we probably don't have to have a massive overhaul where we bring in a consultant and you spend 30, 40 grand redoing the thing. You technically meet the legal qualifications, the planning commission just has to review it, and they could say, yeah, it's still looking good, we're just going to continue with this. And so they could make some adjustments as well. And so I think that's probably how that's going to go. But that's an important thing in 2023. And then back to the sewer disaster on Whitehall Road that I'm working on working out the finances on it. And it's going to be rough because it's so messed up that there are no good options. And part of that is Michigan Adventure. We have a negotiation with them in 2023 because there were 2 major court cases that went to the Court of Appeals over this a few years ago. And so that's when that time frame comes up. So that will be something to look for in 2023. And last discussion item, we have our administrative assistant change. And so I've heard that the rumor mill is cranking on this, and especially when you get into very controlled societies. I heard this from a guy that had grown up in the Soviet Union, and he said the rumor mill is the only place you could get accurate information, which we know how rough accurate is in that statement, and so it's interesting. I think the rumor mill is important, but I've heard it's been cranking on this from several different places, and so Kim, since she's the one leaving, she said she wanted to include a letter, so she's included a letter in this packet, and basically she had sold her house down here, and she has a house up north anyways, in Lake County, and she found a job as an office manager, and it sounds like it might be maybe a better job closer to where she wants to live, so it only makes sense for her to go. And people react so weird on different types of personnel changes. When people voluntarily leave like that because they think it's better for their life, I think it's very weird when people have some sort of resentful or odd emotional reaction. My natural reaction, and the reaction that I think is reasonable, would just be like, oh, well, thanks, and thanks for working with us on getting someone else in and getting them trained, and good for you making something better in the direction that you want to go. You should pursue your values and what you see as meaningful and fulfilling in your life. So good. But those personnel changes are controversial even when they're not controversial, so very interesting stuff. Now, the reference packet that I've that I mentioned before. I won't go through the whole thing now. I'll make a separate video going through various stuff in the reference packet. That was all of the stuff coming up on the board meeting on February 14th, 2022 at 6 p.m. at the Township. So those are just kind of the brief of what we're going to talk about, what the board is going to make decisions on. And so if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to troll me on this video, whatever may be your prerogative. And I'll do a separate video for the reference packet. Thanks.